to the MSDW Podcast. I'm Jason Gumpert, editor at MSDynamicsWorld.com. This week on the podcast, we talk with Eamon O'Toole. He's a practice manager for Dynamics 365 and its customer experience apps at BDO IT Solutions, a professional services firm that serves clients throughout Canada. Eamon's team has been hard at work assessing the broad range of apps and technology options that are part of Dynamics 365, which was formerly bundled under Dynamics CRM Online. We talk about some of his team's findings so far, some of the places where the vision and the reality don't yet sync up, and some of the most promising areas that his team is getting ready for in the future. Hi, Eamon. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Jason.
So I wanted to get your views on a few areas related to the progression of Dynamics CRM into the Dynamics 365 space. I know from some of the writing that you've done on the BDO team blog that your team has really been diving into various components of the application suite, if you want to call it that, and the implications around a lot of the different areas. Can you talk about maybe how your team is approaching the transition to Dynamics 365? I imagine it impacts not just your clients, but the staff as well.
Yeah. So we're coming from a space historically where it was sort of possible to know the full stack. We had a 3-year cycle between upgrades. We could specialize. We could go deep on the development efforts. We could even start creating solutions because we knew we had that 3-year window. Now that not everything, but the focus is in the cloud, and we no longer have control over the upgrade cycles. New features are showing up consistently. We've decided to sort of split our team up into specializations. So my specialization is on the service side, which includes field service. We have someone who's focused on sales, someone else who's focused on project, someone on portals. And then we regularly come together, probably about once a month right now, but we may start meeting more often to sort of share learnings in each of those spaces and as it applies to ongoing projects.
Yeah, I know that in large part, the products themselves really didn't change that much from what Dynamics CRM was to what 365 is being offered as today. A lot of it's the same, and the progression to sort of the same kind of rhythm of R&D updates and feature enhancements and so forth. But has the message changed? Has anything else about how you guys work changed as a result?
I think the conversation that we're having with customers, both existing customers and new customers, has definitely changed with this rebranding to Dynamics 365. Right away, for instance, ERP is part of the conversation. Now, historically at BDO, most of our implementations, even if we're looking at CRM ones, do involve ERP on the back end. Most commonly, that's for managing the financials, so it's NAV or GP. With the new model, with Dynamics 365, the easiest conversation to have is actually with AX. And that's a very different focus. Obviously, it's not a fit for every customer we speak to. And I would say that most of our implementations still involve NAV or GP. But as we're looking towards the cloud, it sort of makes that conversation a little bit deeper with the customers. And more importantly now, we always start with cloud first. I mean, historically, in the last few years, we have been with CRM regardless, not so much on the ERP side. But one of the first conversations we have with a new customer is, how do you feel about the cloud? What's your comfort level? That's our recommended approach, and sort of walk through that process before we even necessarily get too deep on their problem.
Yeah, I'm curious. I asked a few different people the same question, but are you seeing any trends about the kinds of companies that are saying, yeah, I'm real comfortable with the cloud versus those saying that they're not?
A few years ago, I mean, for instance, I'm in Canada. Before we had Canadian data centers, what is that, 2 years now?
Yeah.
About that, the cloud conversation was always challenged by internal IT policies based on data residence. Now, Microsoft had some great up to the privacy commissioner of, I think it was Ontario or Canada. It was a white paper I kept referring to, who was advocating that cloud data in the US is safer than keeping it on-prem in Canada. You know, that was the argument we were having. Over the last year, I haven't really had much pushback on the cloud conversation. It's not specific to industry. Some surprising industries who were very resistant to going to the cloud in the past seem to have very little resistance. Healthcare is a good example, public sector. In the past, we were very heavily challenged about putting any of that data into the cloud, and it doesn't seem to be as much of an issue now. There are some other industries which are still holdouts that I don't understand. I know there's a lot of regulatory requirements. Mining, for example. We have more of a challenge getting mining clients into the cloud than we do healthcare clients.
One of the other things that other people have told me is that there's this sort of inverse relationship between the size of companies and their willingness to go to the cloud. It's almost the exact opposite of what I would have expected, but what I've been hearing from other people is that larger companies seem more open to adopting the cloud, and smaller companies maybe are more, I don't know if they're more protective of their data or more protective of the systems that they've already invested in, but they seem more reluctant, according to other people I've talked to. Does that ring true, or for what you?
I definitely I understand the question. I mean, certainly there's a notion of inertia with a large organization who needs to move. And if we're talking going to the cloud, we'll take CRM as an example. Before we can move CRM, we need to talk about AD, we need to talk about Exchange, probably their document management, their file storage, in order to enable the CRM implementation. So there's a longer conversation there with a large organization. But I think once they make that decision to go to the cloud, they're moving lots of workloads. They'll move authentication and Exchange to the cloud. That's a pretty simple move. They look at how they're managing documents or file shares. They're willing to put that to the cloud in Office 365 and then start to make those connections through CRM and ERP. Smaller customers, in my experience, many of them are already on Office 365 and that cloud conversation has already occurred. Now, there's always exceptions to that. Individual organizations, not necessarily by industry even, it's just sort of their culture or their existing policies, their tolerance for risk even. And they will refuse. We're not getting as many holdouts as we had last year, though.
Okay. Well, that's good news. Yeah, I've heard just incidentally, people at Microsoft say that they're seeing, and you can take this for what it's worth, because obviously they really are enthusiastic about turning people into the cloud.
There's certain motivation to getting them to go to the cloud.
Certain motivation they might have, but the idea that people are changing their perspective much faster than even perhaps people would have expected for themselves, saying, I have no plan to change. And then a year or two later, they've gone 180 degrees. Yeah. I do sense that is happening in certain spaces or certain niches of that do buy, either ERP or are looking to invest either on the ERP or the CRM side or both, which is interesting. I think that it seems like there's. I would say that the AX side of the world, especially the existing AX customers, are probably the real holdouts right now for on-premise, believing in on-premise.
If you look at Nav and GP, they don't really have online options.
Right. They have I don't know, I guess they maybe have more of a legacy of hosting. I know AX has a lot of people who host as well, but perhaps even more on those smaller products. All right, I wanted to maybe dive into a couple of the areas, specific sort of app areas of the Dynamics 365 customer experience realm. You mentioned field service. Now, I'd be interested to get a little more perspective from you on how that's been progressing, the field service capabilities, and maybe what's doing well in that area right now.
So field service as a module, the acquisition is very focused on break fix, like HVAC repair, where there's an incident, an individual is sent out that has the proper skills to address that specific work order, and then everything gets closed out and billed. We were doing a field service implementation last year, and halfway through, Microsoft changed the back entity model to make the scheduling engine more generic so they could also use it for project service. And now we have this schedule anything approach. It's that same scheduling engine that came in through FieldOne as the field service module, but it's been made generic so you can really apply it on any of the entities. And that's what we tend to use more frequently in our implementations than the field specific module. So it's the same technology on the back end. We may just have a different use case that we're using the scheduling engine for. So it's the same technology, if you will, but it's not necessarily the same use case. If we are doing break fix, then it works out of the box. But the ability
go ahead.
I
was going to ask for maybe another example of some of maybe a unique way you could use that scheduling.
The scheduling engine. So we actually had an internal conversation today just about scheduling in general. The use case for a client is recreation management. They have facilities that have healthcare, spin classes, swimming, etc. We initially were looking at using the core scheduling module, the older service scheduling, and we went through an evaluation the past few weeks looking at this new kind of generic schedule anything. And it really is a much better fit. It's more adaptable. There are some features in the updated scheduling engine that are not present. Things like capacity. If we have a room and having a fixed capacity so we know how many people will fit, we're still kind of working around that. But in general, as a back office user, to be able to set up your resources, whether they're people or rooms, their availability, and actually using the scheduling engine to help find availability, that's really strong now. But again, it's not the break fix. So we are using the scheduling engine. We're just not necessarily using all of the entities and the workflows from the field service module.
Okay. On the same topic, I mean, the two areas that seem to me to be some of the most interesting sort of future or sort of forward-looking areas where it could move, and I really don't know if it will. But one I think Microsoft does intend to move it toward, which is trying to pull in IoT scenarios with field service. And I've seen demos of it, or sort of proof of concepts, even at conferences recently, where IoT data does trigger field activities. Right? Is that something that and I think Microsoft's sort of working to really make that something that you could stand up in a fairly straightforward way, perhaps, if that's possible. Is that something that you see companies actually thinking about already? Is trying to use devices to trigger that kind of scenario?
I believe so, yes. Now, one of the differences when we look at IoT, where you could have potentially an enormous number of devices that, for the most part, aren't necessarily triggering actions that CRM would manage, like a service call, for example. Mm-hmm. There's middleware in there, Azure, for instance, where the majority of the transactions are stored in Azure and then are only triggering a case in CRM based on hitting a certain threshold or certain metrics are achieved, then it triggers a case. So I think that model is becoming more common, and we certainly have more tools available to us now to support those types of business cases. But it's not dramatically changing what the technology within CRM or even Dynamics 365 is doing. It's incorporating external services so that we have a broader reach. I like that approach. It's not just IoT, it's also machine learning, where you can have external services that are doing the majority of the work and then triggering specific transactions back in the Dynamics stack.
I guess, okay, and let me jump to one other sort of functional area that I think is kind of interesting, and it's related again to something you just said, which is sort of the workforce management aspect or the resource allocation aspect. That's an area where just personally I've been thinking for several years that's really, I would love to see the Dynamics suite of products be able to really embrace that kind of capability. Do you get requests for, I don't know if either full scale human capital management or HR sort of information systems to complement CRM capabilities often? Yeah,
the PSA model. Yeah, we have historically been implementing an ISV product, PSA Assist, to manage this from within CRM. We're transitioning to the project module, and we're running a pilot now. And I think we have specifically out west for us, our team there is more highly focused on PSA. Nature of the industry, the nature of the companies around, the sort of the client base there, it's certainly more in demand than what we're seeing in the central region where I am. So we are transitioning to the Microsoft project application. And it's nice because we've been able to see its evolution from just not available a year ago, pretty much, to its first iteration. And then this, I guess it was January or February where the next version came out with some greatly enhanced features where I think we're ready to put that into production.
And as a business practice focused on delivering services around this technology, is it challenging to sort of work in these updates that come out from Microsoft back to your client work?
Yeah, it's become that additional, not a daily job, but certainly one of your responsibilities now to keep track of the new features when they're becoming available, and specifically how they can fit. So I mentioned before, we used to have a much broader window where we knew the features were fairly static for a few years, so we had a chance to become truly experts at them, create our own solutions based on those. Now, it's just an extra part of the job where you have to keep track of these new features and start deciding when they can roll in. If it's a new customer, not as much of an issue, but oftentimes we're seeing functionality that becomes production ready as in the middle of an implementation, and we need to present that to the client and talk about the option of using it.
Yeah, it's really just a whole different...
it's a different conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, and just sort of a different... You're just living in a world where that's the reality, that these things will keep rolling out, right? And we're going from it. I shouldn't say we're there yet because this is an evolution. Yeah.
If we look at, as a parallel, Office 365, SharePoint used to be a development platform. We had developers who worked in Visual Studio. They deployed code. There was versioning. We were hired to support the code that we deployed. And as Office 365 evolved, the platform itself became much more of an application. Now you're using the equivalent of Word often when you're deploying Office 365. It doesn't require configuration. Our model needs to change into more of consulting work, governance, training, rather than development. We're still more development driven in the Dynamics space, or well, in the CRM space in particular. And we are watching these features in terms of how we need to be evolving our own practice to keep in step with the vendor, Microsoft.
Yeah, I mean, what's the outcome there in terms of the kind of engagements you do? Is it shorter engagements as a result with more configuration and less customization?
We certainly have a higher volume of shorter engagements than we have had historically, where we're going in and presenting these applications and saying, here's how it works. That's our starting point. What sorts of changes, configuration changes, do you need to make in order to make this fit into the way that you're structured? Those are much shorter engagements for obviously less revenue. In parallel, we still have a very strong XRM practice that specializes in, I'll use grants management as an example. Obviously, there's no application that does that specifically. We're still relying heavily on some of the core entities, but lots of custom ones as well.
Yeah, and that was one of the other areas I wanted to get a little more information from you on was, I know that BDO covers a range of industries, and are there any today that you really think really positioned to take advantage of, maybe that have, I don't know, they've been lagging in technology or just are really poised to take advantage of some of the cool new stuff that you see coming?
So we have a industry focus. Let me get them right. Retail, manufacturing, energy and natural resources, financial services, not-for-profit, and then our other bucket. So ironically, professional services are in our other bucket, which tends to be a very good fit for the new project service automation. That's one strategic direction. We're going after that sector specifically because there's more or less an out-of-the-box application that's geared to that sector. Whereas we don't have a retail application, for instance, that we could pursue. So we use other aspects. It could be the sales module, it could be marketing to focus on other industries. In terms of alignments, PSA is geared specifically at one of our subsectors.
Interesting. Do you feel like the project service app of 365 competes with sort of best of breed PSA kinds of applications that are out there? Or is it companies that are coming from nothing and they're sort of tying it in with their larger CRM plans?
I'm going to have a long-winded response, but let's look at the acquisitions over the past few years. I mean, a few years ago, it was Parature, and I can't remember the original name of the marketing one that Microsoft acquired.
Marketing Pilot.
Yeah, thank you. Both of which are standalone applications with existing customer bases that don't integrate into CRM. And They didn't last very long. Now, the next round of acquisitions, FieldOne, ADX, they are built on top of and require CRM to function, so they're already integrated. Those are going to have a much better success rate. I think where we're going as we evolve is we've gone from broad platform development, XRM type activities where we create our own entities, to these newer acquisitions that already have markets they're focused on. FieldOne is focused very heavily on that service, that break fix project service the way it is right now, and it's certainly configurable, but it's very heavily geared to a professional services organization that doesn't have a lot of products, for instance, that it manages. It's more people time, utilization time. So if you're running your company out of Microsoft Project, this is an incredible fit for you. If project is not how you operate, then you're going to be required to evolve and adapt that type of a model to make the best out of the PSA application.
Do you see more companies adopting a project point of view on the way they operate? Is that something you're actually seeing out there in the world? Something I certainly hear predictions about.
It certainly has its benefits, but it's not always Microsoft's vision of what project-oriented management is. And the way that PSA module is structured, that's really the template that you're working from. Now, it's a fairly extensible template. You can have all sorts of different approaches and methodologies that are supported, but it's still within that realm. I think it is becoming more common. We see manufacturing clients, existing clients, who want to add in additional functions, features to manage. It could be an innovation where they're developing a new product, but they want to manage that and, more importantly, track costs and resources on a project level as part of that initiative that they've always been doing.
Excellent. Well, just going back to one of the things that initially sparked this conversation, which was, sort of this perspective blog post that you put together, sort of sharing some of your team's views on different elements of Dynamics 365. I thought it was a great candid conversation. And I'm just curious if there's anything else that you are bringing back either to your clients or even possibly when you're talking to Microsoft on maybe the flip side of the circle there, in terms of feedback or, observations that you're making that you think are valuable, again, either on the client side or perhaps on even from Microsoft, to know about what your team is learning.
So some of the some of the announcements and some of the features that are part of the Dynamics 365 bundle, I think have huge potential. We're currently evaluating those with an eye towards when they're production ready. So we have taken some time out and looked at, can we use Power Apps, for instance? How does Flow fit into moving data between these different systems? And we have to sort of stay on top of that and keep going back to those new functions to really assess, okay, when is this going to be a fit on a specific project, or when is this even a service that we want to start putting in front of our clients and recommending that they move to a different type of, I don't know if I would call it an integration engine necessarily, but maybe it's an extension to their workflows. So we're still very much in that research stage, trying to assess these new features that are available, and we're aware that some of them aren't ready for production yet.
Yeah, I guess one of the benefits of these things rolling out sort of iteratively is you can, I mean, maybe with a few exceptions, is you can sort of try a lot of these things without making a huge investment. Even if you're a customer who's a little bit daring, you could try a Power App, you could try creating a portal. I mean, maybe there's a little bit of a purchase element that adds to that one, but you could probably trial a lot of these things without, if you have the time and the resources, without making any major investments, right? If you're already sort of bought into the overall platform.
Well, there's certainly net new clients. They can go out and create their own trial account and start to assess some of the functionality to see if it's a fit for their organization. And existing clients who may be looking towards an upgrade or even a migration to the cloud to take advantage of some of the new services that are available. Those are all potential opportunities, absolutely. The flip side to that is we're also moving into that model where the platform is more of a commodity. Once it's more open, once it's broken into components and the services are a bit smaller and very easy to understand with specific use cases, the customers can be, what's the magic number? I can never remember, 60% or 70% into the buy cycle before we ever have a chance to talk to them.
Yeah, that certainly does change the dynamic of how you're engaging, I guess, how you're sort of guiding them, because they've already learned so much.
And may have preferences in terms of how they would like to see the final solution working.
Do you still see a lot of companies that really are starting from no real CRM background, or are these like third generation systems at this point?
It's a mix. We tend to have long-term clients, so oftentimes it's an existing client who's on an older version, and it's more of an education session where we're talking about, here are some of the new features that are available that's a good fit to what you're currently doing. But oftentimes we're not talking about a straight upgrade anymore. If we're moving into a different service, like what's not available yet, but I guess I'd call piloting it, the preview for relationship insights. This has huge potential, but it also dramatically changes some of the ways that we've configured lead nurturing or contact management for a client that's on CRM 2011. We have a very different way to look at these types of records now in the interactions because we have a whole new service that's available.
Sure. I guess maybe the same would come into play if you take sort of an existing or like one of those pre-built Power BI content packs, for example, right? Unless you've already got a system that aligns perfectly to those content types, right? And those attributes, you're talking about either rebuilding the content pack or changing the way they use the system, perhaps, right? Although I don't think anyone would really do that. So yeah, I think I see what you mean. All right. Anything else we sort of left out that you wanted to cover today, or?
I think with any new, let's call this a platform announcement.
Oh, sure.
These are very early days. We know that in the first year, there's going to be some bigger changes made, and we're looking for more stabilization next year. So I guess our focus this year is, well, at least for these first few months, is really catching up, is trying to determine and assess what these new features are and where they may fit in, potentially replacing approaches and solutions that we've put in place in the past even.
Yeah, it is the most important thing for a company like yours as a business, and trying to obviously think about where the best opportunities are. Is it thinking about which features offer the best opportunities for you as a business? I mean, there's got to be some features that are nice to have but don't really move the needle,
right?
Whereas other ones are really important, right?
There is a broad range of new features, and let's call them even services that have been introduced and will continue to be introduced throughout the year. Not all of them are going to be a fit, and certainly taking a shiny new piece of functionality and putting it in front of the client may not serve any benefit whatsoever. So we need to understand it first and try and figure out how it fits into either an existing solution or how it fits into a proposed solution for a new customer, and really see if the benefit is there. I like the relationship insights one because it's new to me. I like that it's pulling data out of completely different sources that we usually didn't look at. We had third-party tools for this in the past, and now it's potentially native in the platform. That doesn't mean it's necessarily a fit to all of the organizations that we're working with.
All right. Well, maybe we should end it there. So, Eamon, thanks very much for joining us today. It's been fun.
That's good. Thanks for your time.
This has been the MSDW Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to be on the podcast or have any feedback on what you've heard or what you'd like to hear, drop us a line. Again, I'm Jason Gumpert. You can reach me by email at jgumpert@msdynamicsworld.com. Until next time, we're MS Dynamics World signing off.